What if the answer to our oldest question arrived not as a greeting, but as a deadline? For generations, we have listened. We have built colossal ears of steel and silicon, turning them towards the heavens, straining to hear a single deliberate whisper across the unimaginable void. Our search has been a testament to human hope, a patient, lonely vigil kept in the face of an overwhelming cosmic quiet. We scanned the ancient light of distant galaxies, sifting through the chaotic symphony of dying stars and birthing nebulae, all for one sound that did not belong. A sound that was ordered, a sound that was time-sent, asterisk. We imagined what it would be like. A complex encyclopedia, perhaps encoded in the universal language of mathematics. A friendly hailing a beacon of peace from a sibling civilization. Or even a dire warning, a final testament from a culture long since vanished. But the silence was the answer we always received. An answer so profound, so unending, it became a character in our cosmic story, the Great Silence. It suggested we were either impossibly early to the galactic conversation or terrifyingly alone. Then, on a Tuesday, not in a moment of celebrated focused searching, but as a ghost in the machine of a system designed for something else entirely. The Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, is our planetary tripwire. A network of telescopes in Hawaii, Chile, and South Africa, it scans the entire visible sky every 24 hours. Its purpose is mundane, yet critical, to find the space rocks, the city killers, the civilization enders, before they find us. It is a guardian, its digital eyes fixed firmly on our own cosmic neighborhood. But space is deep, and light travels far. And on that unassuming Tuesday, an anomaly flickered in its data stream. It was nothing to the automated threat detection software. Not an asteroid, not a comet, just a whisper of radio energy so faint it was almost indistinguishable from the background hiss of the universe. A single sharp pulse from a patch of sky in the constellation Lacerta. The system logged it, classified it as noise, and moved on. So would have we. Except for one detail, a detail that would unravel everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos. 22 hours and 56 minutes later, it happened again, from the exact same point in the sky, identical in frequency, duration, and intensity. This was not noise. Noise is chaos. It is the static of creation, the random crackle of a billion disorganized events. This was the opposite of chaos. This was order. It was a signal. The scientific community, a global network bound by data and cautious skepticism, began to stir. The initial report was met with the expected healthy dose of disbelief. A malfunctioning satellite in high orbit, a previously unknown terrestrial source bouncing signals off the ionosphere, a glitch in the Atlas correlator creating a phantom echo in the data. Every mundane explanation was hunted down with relentless precision. The world's great radio observatories, from the high desert of Atacama to the mist-shrouded valleys of Guizhou, swiveled their immense dishes, their attention now drawn away from their scheduled tasks. They aimed their focus at that unassuming patch of darkness, and they waited. They did not have to wait long. 22 hours and 56 minutes after the last pulse, it returned. A perfect crystalline spike of energy punching through the cosmic static with the clarity of a bell struck in a silent cathedral. The signal was confirmed, and with that confirmation a new era of human history began, not with a thunderous announcement but with a quiet collective intake of breath in control rooms across the planet. It was given a name, as all celestial discoveries are. 3I Atlas. The 3I designated it as only the third confirmed interstellar object to ever be detected passing through our solar system after Oumuamua and Borisov. The Atlas honored the system that by sheer chance had first noticed it. But this name, sterile and scientific, belied the profound mystery it represented. This was no passive tumbling rock. This was a messenger. And for 7 years it delivered the same maddeningly simple message. pulse. A silence lasting 1,376 minutes. Then another identical pulse. It was a cosmic metronome, a celestial heartbeat of impossible regularity. It was a pattern so stark, so pure in its simplicity, that it defied any known natural explanation. It wasn't a pulsar. Pulsars are the lighthouses of the cosmos, the spinning remnants of massive stars, sweeping beams of radiation across space. But they are not perfect. They spin down their rotations, slowing over eons by fractions of a nanosecond, a decay that is both measurable and predictable. 3I Atlas showed no such decay. Its timing was immutable, as if tied to the fundamental constants of the universe itself. It wasn't a fast radio burst, or FRB. Those are cataclysmic millisecond-long blasts of energy from distant galaxies thought to be caused by magnetars, stars with magnetic fields of unimaginable power. They are violent, chaotic, and almost entirely unpredictable one-offs. 3I Atlas was the antithesis of this. It was gentle, precise, and as reliable as the dawn. For 7 years, humanity lived with this enigma. We studied it, debated it, built our theories upon its foundation of perfect repetition. It was a message we could not decipher because it contained no apparent information beyond its own existence. It was a single, repeating note in the grand symphony. Was it a navigational beacon for a galactic travel network? A simple, "We are here," sent out by a civilization billions of years old? Or was it something more alien, a purpose our minds were not yet equipped to grasp? The simple, repeating nature of the signal was both a comfort and a torment. It was comforting because its stability meant we had time to build new instruments, to develop new theories, to listen more closely. We fell into a rhythm with it. The arrival of the pulse every 22 hours and 56 minutes became a familiar event, a reminder that we were no longer just shouting into the void. Something, somewhere, was breathing in a steady cosmic rhythm. The torment came from the lack of progress. 7 years of data produced 7 years of the exact same result. The signal never wavered in frequency. It never changed its intensity. It never altered its timing by so much as the whisper of a second. It was a celestial Rosetta Stone with only one character repeated ad infinitum. We were like ancient scholars staring at a single perfect hieroglyph devoid of any context that might unlock its meaning. The initial exhilarating thrill of discovery had slowly matured into a state of persistent, low-grade wonder. The greatest mystery in human history had become routine. 3I Atlas was a fact of life, a new star in our intellectual sky, a puzzle for the next generation to solve. We had grown complacent. We thought we understood the rules. And then, 114 days ago, the metronome stopped. The missed pulse was an event of deafening silence. At first, it was assumed to be an instrumental error. A dozen observatories ran frantic diagnostics. Cables were checked, software was rebooted, receivers were recalibrated. But the global network was functioning perfectly. The silence was real. For the first time in 7 years, 3I Atlas had missed its appointment. Panic, carefully concealed behind the calm language of scientific inquiry, rippled through the community. Had its power source failed, had it been destroyed or passed beyond a nebula that blocked its transmission, or the most chilling thought of all, had it simply been turned off? The idea that a conscious decision was behind the silence was almost too much to bear. It implied an intelligence that was not just broadcasting but observing, an intelligence that knew it was being watched. For one full cycle, 22 hours and 56 minutes, the universe held its breath. Scientists sat at their consoles, their screens, showing nothing but the familiar, meaningless static of deep space. The rhythm that had defined so much of their careers was broken. The heartbeat was gone. The silence it left behind was no longer the passive quiet of an empty cosmos. It was an active, heavy silence filled with questions and a rising sense of dread. It felt like a final answer, It felt like the end, but at the exact moment the next pulse was due, it returned. Not as one, but as a sequence. First, a series of 9 short, rapid pulses, a brief pause, then 8 pulses, a pause, then 7. The pattern continued, a descending cascade of signals, each group separated by a pause of precise, identical length. Down it went. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then a single pulse, identical in every way to the original signal that had captivated us for 7 years. The control rooms, which had been paralyzed by silence, erupted, not in celebration but in a chaotic scramble of disbelief and dawning comprehension. The data was shared, checked, and rechecked in a matter of minutes. The pattern was undeniable. It was perfect, and it was terrifyingly familiar. It was not a message of introduction. It was not a beacon. It was not a simple declaration of existence. It was a language that every human from every culture in history would instantly, instinctively understand. The language of time. The language of finality. The signal was no longer repeating. It was counting down. And for the next cycle, the sequence began with the number 8. The following cycle, 7. Then 6. Today, a new sequence arrived. It began with the number 5. The object known as 3I, Atlas, has been sending us a signal for 7 years. But we now know that was just the preamble. The real message began 114 days ago. It's a message that tells us that the universe is not only not empty, but that it operates on a schedule. And humanity has just been given an appointment. We don't know who sent it, we don't know what they want or what will happen when the count reaches 0, but we know with a certainty that chills us to the bone exactly when that will be. The whisper from the stars has become a ticking clock, and we are running out of time to discover if it is counting down to a revelation or an ultimatum. What does silence sound like when it stretches across 1 billion light years? For nearly all of human history, that profound emptiness was the only sound the universe seemed to make back to us. It was a silence of unimaginable scale, a quiet so deep it defined our cosmic isolation. We shouted our questions into the void, with radio telescopes straining to hear a reply over the faint ancient crackle of the cosmos itself. We listened for a whisper, a pattern, a single note in the noise that was not our own. For generations, the silence was the only answer we received, until one evening it wasn't. It began not with a thunderous announcement, but with a flicker on a screen, an anomaly buried in a mountain of data. The discovery wasn't made by a team searching for extraterrestrial life, nor by a grand observatory built to unravel the universe's deepest secrets. It was found by a sentinel, a robotic guardian angel of a different kind. The Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, is our planet's early warning network. Its 4 telescopes scattered across the globe from Hawaii to South Africa conduct a relentless sweeping vigil of the night sky. Their solemn duty is a practical one: to find the silent, menacing rocks, the city-killer asteroids and comets on trajectories that might intersect with our own. Atlas isn't designed to listen for whispers from the void. It's designed to spot incoming threats, its algorithms trained to identify the faint telltale movement of nearby objects against the static backdrop of distant stars. It searches for motion, for change, for things that do not belong. And on a cool, clear night at the Haleakala Observatory in Hawaii, it found something that belonged nowhere we knew. A graduate student reviewing the previous night's observation logs noticed a persistent flag raised by the system's diagnostic software. It was a faint, rhythmic pulse of electromagnetic energy, an echo so regular it was initially dismissed as a software glitch, or more likely terrestrial interference. Perhaps it was a misfiring satellite, a military radar bouncing off the upper atmosphere, or even a faulty microwave oven in a distant town. Such ghosts in the machine are common: the frustrating static, that astronomers must painstakingly filter out to see the universe clearly. The protocol was simple: log the interference, run a diagnostic on the telescope's receiver, and move on. But this ghost refused to be exorcised. When the Atlas telescope in Chile reported the exact same signal synchronized to the picosecond, the possibility of a local malfunction vanished. Then came South Africa, and then the Canary Islands. The signal was real. It was coming from the sky, and it was coming from very, very far away. The alert traveled through secure channels, leaping across continents to the world's premier radio astronomy observatories. At the Very Large Array in New Mexico, nestled in the stark beauty of the plains of San Agustin, Dr. Lena Petrova received the notification. A prodigy in the field of signal processing, Petrova had built a career on deciphering the faint, chaotic symphonies of deep space. Her first instinct, honed by years of professional skepticism, was to find the mundane explanation. She directed a portion of the VLA's immense collecting area, a sprawling Y-shaped configuration of 28 colossal dishes, towards the coordinates provided by Atlas. As the raw data flooded her monitors, she expected to unmask a familiar cosmic artist. The universe, after all, has its own predictable rhythms. Perhaps she theorized it was a pulsar. These are the collapsed spinning cores of massive stars, celestial lighthouses, that sweep beams of radiation across the cosmos with astonishing regularity. We have catalogued thousands of them within our own Milky Way, each with its own unique rotational signature. A new faint pulsar would be a noteworthy but ultimately routine discovery. For the first 12 hours, the pulsar theory held. The signal was a perfect metronome, a pulse arriving every 1.87645 seconds. A rhythm so precise you could set an atomic clock to it. The pulse itself was narrow, clean, a spike of energy in a specific band of the radio spectrum. It had all the hallmarks of a neutron star, a cosmic spinning top, forged in the unimaginable violence of a supernova. Dr. Petrova and her team began the methodical process of characterization, mapping the pulse's profile, measuring its intensity, and attempting to trace its origin point. Simultaneously high on the sacred slopes of Mauna Kea in Hawaii, Dr. Aris Thorne swiveled one of the giant Keck telescopes not to listen but to look. Thorne was an observer of the old school, a man who trusted photons he could see over radio waves he could not. His specialty was galactic archaeology, hunting for the faint optical afterglows of cataclysmic events. If this was a pulsar, there might be a faint telltale nebula, the gossamer remnant of the star that died to create it. He would find the body, but as the days turned into weeks, the comfortable, familiar explanation began to fray at the edges, worn thin by the sheer, unyielding perfection of the signal. The first crack in the theory came from Petrova's analysis. Pulsars, while incredibly regular, are not perfect. They are physical objects subject to the laws of physics. They experience starquakes, tiny shifts in their crust that cause infinitesimal but measurable glitches or jitters in their rotation. They interact with surrounding plasma, which can scatter and distort their signal on its long journey to Earth. Furthermore, every pulsar is born spinning rapidly and over millions of years bleeds off rotational energy, gradually, almost imperceptibly slowing down. This spin-down rate is a fundamental characteristic, a clock winding down over cosmic timescales. The signal from this new object, officially designated 3I, Atlas III, confirmed interstellar object discovered by the survey, had no glitches. Its pulse profile was a perfect waveform, so clean and free of distortion it looked less like a natural phenomenon and more like something generated in a laboratory. And most unnerving of all, it had no spin down. Week after week, its period remained locked at 1.87645 seconds, unwavering out to the 15th decimal place. It was a gravitational gyroscope of impossible stability. It was as if the laws of stellar evolution of entropy itself simply did not apply to it. Then came the second, more profound problem from Aris Thorne's team at Keck. After weeks of long exposure imaging, cross-referencing every star chart and deep sky survey ever created, his conclusion was as stark as it was baffling. There was nothing there. The coordinates for 3I, Atlas, pointed to a patch of sky utterly, profoundly empty. It wasn't just that there was no visible pulsar or supernova remnant. There were no stars, no gas clouds, not even a faint, distant galaxy. The signal was emanating from the blackness itself, a lonely voice calling out from the desolate emptiness of an intergalactic void, a cosmic desert separating vast filaments of galaxies. To produce a signal strong enough to be detected from such a distance, its source would need the energy output of an entire galaxy. Yet it was emanating from a point source smaller than our Sun, located in a place where by all rights nothing should be. A pulsar cannot exist in isolation in such a void. It needs a massive progenitor star, and such stars are only born in the dense star-forming nurseries of galaxies. It was a lighthouse without a coastline, a bonfire in the middle of an infinite ocean. The global astronomical community was now in a state of quiet, feverish obsession. The world's greatest observatories coordinated their efforts in an unprecedented campaign. The Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, a single dish so large the entire VLA could fit inside it, strained to detect the faintest polarization in the signal, a clue to the magnetic field at its source. The Parkes Observatory in Australia, the venerable dish that brought humanity its first images from the moon, monitored the signal from the southern hemisphere, confirming its global reach and its unearthly consistency. Every known astrophysical phenomenon was proposed and systematically dismantled by the data. Could it be a magnetar, a neutron star with a terrifyingly powerful magnetic field? No, the signal lacked the characteristic X-ray bursts and the chaotic energy profile. A new type of fast radio burst impossible. FRBs are ephemeral, one-off cataclysms of incomprehensible power lasting only milliseconds. This was a continuous, repeating beat, a cosmic heartbeat, a background quasar, a supermassive black hole feeding at the dawn of time. Again, the data refused to cooperate. The signal was too coherent, too narrow-band, completely unlike the broad, messy radiation spectrum of an active galactic nucleus. At the VLA, Lena Petrova and her team worked in hushed marathon sessions, fueled by cold coffee and a growing sense of awe that bordered on fear. They were no longer just astronomers. They were detectives, investigating a cosmic enigma. Every day, they would gather around the primary monitor, half expecting the signal to have vanished, to have been a collective hallucination, an elaborate, cruel joke played by the universe. But every day it was there, that perfect, unwavering pulse. A spike on a graph, arriving from the depths of space and time, with a precision that defied nature. They ran simulations modeling every conceivable natural source, from oscillating strange quark stars to colliding black holes in exotic binary systems. Each model failed, crashing against the hard, immovable wall of the signal's flawless regularity and its desolate, impossible origin. They had rigorously, assiduously eliminated every single natural explanation they could conceive of. They had stripped away the plausible, peeled back the improbable, and were now left staring at the impossible. The team culture shifted. The open, boisterous discussions in the control room were replaced by quieter, one-on-one conversations in hallways. People would stare at the data waterfall for long stretches, lost in thought. The question that no one dared to ask aloud began to hang in the air, thick and heavy with implication. The implications were too vast, too paradigm-shattering to contemplate seriously. It was the stuff of science fiction, of late-night talk shows, not of serious, sober-minded astrophysics. A signal this structured, this stable, this powerful, originating from a place with no conceivable natural engine to power. It left only one conclusion, a conclusion so profound it threatened to rewrite everything we thought we knew about. our place in the universe. But scientists deal in evidence, not speculation, and so they continued to watch. They listened. They catalogued every pulse, analyzed every photon, hoping for a new clue, a new variable that would lead them back to the safe, predictable shores of known physics. For 18 months, the signal gave them nothing new. It simply continued its perfect metronomic beat, a constant in the cosmos, a celestial clock ticking away in the dark. It was a foundation upon which they began to build a new, terrifying and exhilarating understanding. And then one Tuesday in October, without warning, the foundation crumbled. The metronome, the one unwavering constant in this entire mystery, did something no natural object, no spinning star, no cosmic accident ever could. It changed its rhythm. And for a time, that was the story. A story of profound, almost spiritual cosmic order. We had found the universe's own perfect timepiece, a celestial metronome ticking with a precision that humbled our most advanced atomic clocks. Every 1.83749 seconds without fail, the pulse arrived. A whisper from the interstellar dark, as predictable as the laws of physics themselves. It was a comfort, a validation, that amidst the chaos of cosmic creation, there existed points of sublime mathematical certainty. We pointed our greatest instruments at it, listening to its steady heartbeat, and in that rhythm we heard a story we understood. The story of a dense, spinning remnant of a long-dead star, a pulsar of impossible stability, a gravitational gyroscope holding its rhythm against the ages. We built our models, we published our papers, and we settled into a comfortable relationship with this distant marvel. But the universe, it seems, rarely offers comfort without an eventual price. The first hint of trouble was so infinitesimally small, it was immediately dismissed as a ghost in the machine. A single data point from a single observation run at the Green Bank telescope arrived not at the expected microsecond, but a few nanoseconds late. A nanosecond, a billionth of a second. The time it takes light to travel less than a foot. It was nothing. A cosmic ray striking a circuit board, a momentary fluctuation in Earth's ionosphere, a processing error in a supercomputer buried deep beneath the Earth. It was noise, the eternal hiss of reality that scientists spend their entire careers learning to ignore, to filter out, to discard, in their relentless search for the pure underlying signal. The data point was flagged, noted, and forgotten. An insignificant tremor in a symphony of perfect repetition. But then, a week later, it happened again. This time, the pulse arrived a few nanoseconds times early asterisk. The anomaly was logged by the Parkes Observatory in Australia, half a world away, using entirely different hardware, different software, different atmospheric conditions. Two data points do not make a pattern, but they do make a question. A quiet, unsettling question that began to echo in the secure data channels connecting the world's radio astronomers. The teams ran diagnostics, recalibrating receivers with a new and sudden urgency. They checked the maser clocks, the atomic hearts of the observatories, against GPS satellites, finding them to be as steady as time itself. They rerouted signals through redundant systems, swapping out processors and rewriting correlator code, hunting for the gremlin they were so certain had to be lurking within their own creations. Because the alternative, the idea that the fault lay not in our instruments but in the celestial object itself, that was for the moment unthinkable. For 3i, Atlas to falter even by a nanosecond was like suggesting a fundamental constant of the universe had decided to take the day off. The hunt for the error became a global obsession. You have to understand the culture of this science. Precision is its religion. To claim a discovery, you must first wage a brutal war against every conceivable source of error. You must become your own harshest critic, your own most determined skeptic. And so they did. Teams in Chile at the Atacama Large Millimeter Array cross-referenced their observations with data from the Very Large Array in New Mexico. They developed new algorithms designed specifically to scrub the signal clean of any possible terrestrial or solar system interference. They accounted for the subtle gravitational tug of Jupiter on their telescopes, the minuscule shift in Earth's orbit, the faint plasma winds blowing from the sun. They built a digital fortress around the signal, an elaborate castle of corrections and compensations designed to protect its perfect purity. Yet the ghost remained. Worse, it was no longer just a flicker. The nanosecond deviations became picoseconds, then microseconds. The signal was beginning to jitter. It was like listening to a master drummer who, after playing a flawless beat for years, began to introduce tiny, almost imperceptible hesitations and advances. The rhythm was still there, the core 1.83-second pulse was undeniable, but it was developing a strange syncopated flutter around the edges, a kind of temporal static that defied every attempt to filter it out. And something else began to happen, something that sent a deeper chill through the handful of scientists privy to the raw, uncorrected data. The frequency of the signal, its specific radio color, had always been anchored at a precise 1420 MHz, the famous hydrogen line, which had initially been a source of intense excitement and speculation. Now it too was beginning to drift, not by much, just fractions of a hertz. But the drift wasn't random. It wasn't the gentle, predictable slide you would expect from a pulsar losing rotational energy over millennia. It was complex. The frequency would shift down, then up, then down again, following a curve that looked suspiciously unlike anything nature was known to produce. The first line of defense, instrumental error, had crumbled. Now they fell back to the second line, a new exotic but still times natural, times astrophysical phenomenon. The frantic search for a natural explanation began. Perhaps 3I, Atlas, wasn't alone. Maybe it was part of a binary system locked in a gravitational dance with an invisible partner, a black hole or another neutron star. The companion's gravity would pull 3I, Atlas back and forth, creating a Doppler shift, a wobble in the signal's arrival time and frequency that might explain the bizarre jitters. Supercomputers were tasked with the problem, running through trillions of possible orbital configurations, trying to find a dance partner and a choreography that would match the observed data. They tried every combination imaginable: long elliptical orbits, tight fast circles, even complex three-body problems. None of them fit. The observed variations were too erratic, too structured in their chaos. The gravitational pull of a companion object would be smooth, a graceful sine wave. This was something else. This was a jagged, almost digital series of shifts. The next hypothesis was even more dramatic. Perhaps we weren't seeing the effects of a companion, but convulsions on the surface of the object itself. Neutron stars are known to have starquakes, cataclysmic ruptures in their crystalline crusts that can momentarily alter their spin rate. Could this be a storm of continuous tiny starquakes, making the pulsar stutter like a cosmic engine on the verge of stalling? The models were consulted. The physics was clear. A starquake is a violent, singular event. It releases immense energy, and the star's rotation then settles into a new but once again stable period. It doesn't produce a sustained, intricate pattern of minute variations. It is a gong, not a symphony. This theory, too, was discarded into the growing pile of failed explanations. They tried everything. Gravitational lensing by a rogue planet which could split the signal and cause interference patterns. But the math showed this would produce a predictable symmetrical distortion, not the complexity we saw. They modeled interstellar scintillation, the twinkling of radio sources as their signals passed through the turbulent plasma of the interstellar medium. But this effect would be random, a form of cosmic weather, and the variations in 3I, Atlas's signal, were becoming less random with every passing day. Each theory they threw at the problem was shredded by the relentless, bizarre truth of the data. There's a moment in every great scientific mystery when the comfort of the known gives way to the terror of the unknown. It's the moment when you have exhausted all the familiar culprits and you are left staring into an abyss of possibility. For the core team, analyzing the 3I, Atlas data, that moment had arrived. The mood in their labs shifted from frustration to a kind of hushed, fearful reverence. They were no longer debugging a machine or solving a known astrophysical puzzle. They were standing on the shore of an ocean none of their maps had ever described. The signal was not a malfunctioning clock. The noise they had tried so hard to eliminate was not noise at all. A brilliant young postdoctoral researcher in Germany, Dr. Aris Thorne, had a thought that was both heresy and revelation. What if he proposed we've been looking at this completely backward? What if the jitter isn't a flaw corrupting the signal? What if the jitter times the signal? He wrote a new piece of code. Instead of averaging out the tiny deviations in pulse arrival times to get a cleaner primary signal, his program did the opposite. It ignored the main one, 83-second pulse entirely, and focused only on the variations, the microseconds of deviation from the expected norm. He took thousands of hours of observation from archives around the world and plotted these minuscule timing errors as a single continuous stream of data. He was looking for the shape of the static, the architecture of the noise. The first results were a meaningless scatter plot, a cloud of random-seeming points. Disappointment. Maybe it truly was just complex, chaotic noise. But Thorne had an instinct. He changed the axis of his plot. Instead of plotting the deviation against simple chronological time, he plotted it against a rolling count of the primary pulses. Pulse 1, Pulse 2, Pulse 3, a new temporal coordinate system defined not by our seconds but by the object's own heartbeat. He ran the program again, and on his screen the chaos collapsed. The cloud of random points snapped into focus. It wasn't a line. It wasn't a wave. It was a structure. A breathtakingly complex, deeply ordered and utterly non-natural pattern. It was like staring at the static on an old television screen for months, only to suddenly realize the specks of snow are not random at all. They are forming intricate cascading spirals and nested geometric shapes. The jitter in the signal's arrival time, the very noise everyone had been trying to erase, was encoding information. Within the timing variations, there were repeating sequences, but they were nested inside larger, non-repeating sequences, like words within sentences and sentences within paragraphs. The same was true for the frequency shifts. When plotted against the pulse count, the tiny variations in radio color were not random drifts, but discrete quantized jumps between specific frequencies. A kind of digital alphabet, using frequency as the letters. They found prime numbers. Long, elegant strings of them, encoded in the number of pulses between specific frequency shifts. 2, 3, 5, 7, 1, 1, 1, 3, 1, 7. On and on. A clear, unambiguous beacon of mathematics. Then came the mathematical constants. The value of pi encoded to 32 decimal places in the subtle phase modulation of the radio waves. The golden ratio phi, embedded in the timing relationships between nested pulse sequences. It was a message layered with a density and intellectual richness that was staggering. This was the turning point. The moment the world of astronomy broke in two, there was the time before when 3I, Atlas, was a fascinating but natural curiosity, and the time after, when it became a source of profound existential dread and wonder. The frantic search for a natural cause was over. No starquake, no orbital mechanics, no trick of light or gravity could spontaneously generate the first 100 prime numbers or embed the fundamental constants of mathematics into its emissions. This was not physics. This was language. This was intent. This was the meticulous work of an intelligence so advanced it used the rotational period of a neutron star as the carrier wave for its message, and the very fabric of space-time as its writing paper. The implications were so enormous they were difficult to process. For centuries we had shouted our own messages into the void, beaming our mathematics, our music, our greetings out into the silent dark, hoping someone somewhere might hear. We never truly expected an answer, and we certainly never expected the answer to come not from a distant star system, but from a cryptic nomadic object that had wandered into our own cosmic backyard. The small global community of researchers who knew the truth entered a state of clandestine shock. They checked their results and then checked them again, their minds rebelling against the evidence their own instruments were providing. This discovery wouldn't just rewrite textbooks, it would rewrite our entire understanding of our place in the universe. The Copernican principle, the foundational idea that we are not special, that Earth is not a privileged place, had been our guiding light. It taught us humility. But what did it mean when a message of unmistakable intelligence was being broadcast, not omnidirectionally to the whole galaxy, but in a tight beam aimed with impossible precision directly at our solar system? It felt less like a greeting and more like a summons. The perfect celestial metronome had not broken. It had been deliberately altered. Its pure, simple tone had been modulated to carry a new and terrifying composition. The signal was no longer just a repeating pulse, it was a broadcast. And as the teams worked in secret, translating more and more of the intricate patterns, a final chilling realization began to dawn. The layers of mathematics, the physical constants, the prime numbers, they were not the message itself. They were a primer, an instruction manual, a key designed to teach us the language of the broadcast. They were the prelude to the real communication, and the central feature of that communication, hidden in the grand architecture of the patterns, was a sequence, a vast descending series of numbers. The perfect rhythm of 3i Atlas was gone, replaced by something that was no longer repeating, something that was counting. For months, the effort had felt like trying to comprehend a symphony with only a single note, a relentless, maddeningly consistent pulse broadcast across the void. The great observatories of Earth, from the high desert of Chile to the silent valleys of Guizhou, had become monasteries of science, their inhabitants devoted to a singular esoteric text. They had mapped the signal's complex internal structure, the nested fractals and harmonic cascades that proved its artifice, yet its ultimate meaning remained a locked room. Every attempt at translation, every cryptographic key had dissolved into nonsense. The greatest minds of a generation were staring into the face of alien intelligence and finding only a beautiful, impenetrable mirror reflecting their own limitations. The initial euphoria of discovery had long since curdled into a quiet global desperation, a shared professional agony. They were drowning in data, yet dying of thirst for a single drop of understanding. The prevailing theories had all been exhausted, each one a promising path that led to a sheer cliff. Was it a mathematical primer, broadcasting the universal constants of physics? The numbers didn't align with the precision you would expect. Was it a star chart, a map pointing to a home we could not see? The coordinates, it seemed to suggest, were incoherent, a scattershot of points in deep space with no discernible connection. Was it a simple beacon, a cosmic lighthouse, whose intricate design was merely a way of shouting, "We are here," against the background hiss of the universe? That felt too simple an explanation that failed to honor the signal's staggering complexity. Humanity had found a message in a bottle cast upon the cosmic ocean, and for all our vaunted intelligence, we could not even pull the cork. The signal from 3i Atlas repeated its grand elaborate cycle, a gravitational metronome keeping a time we did not comprehend. And with every pass, the silence that followed felt heavier, more profound, a judgment on our species' intellectual hubris. The breakthrough, when it finally arrived, came not from a grand synthesis of ideas, but from a moment of profound frustration. It was born in the sterile, blue-hued glow of a supercomputing cluster near Garching, Germany, where a young astrophysicist named Dr. Elara Vance was performing what she considered a fool's errand. Her team lead, weary from another 17-hour shift, had tasked her with a final desperate analysis: disregard the content of the signal entirely. Ignore the pulses, the frequencies, the intricate waveforms. Instead, he had suggested just measure the silence. measure the precise infinitesimal gaps, times between times, the major cycle repetitions. It was an act of scientific surrender, an admission that the language itself was beyond them, so perhaps the punctuation held a clue. Vance had scoffed privately, believing it was the intellectual equivalent of trying to understand a novel by analyzing the spaces between the words. She fed terabytes of archival data into a new chronometric analysis program, a program she herself had designed to hunt for the subtle timing variations in pulsars. She was not expecting to find anything, merely to produce a report confirming another dead end. For hours, the computer churned its processors, generating a low, comforting hum that filled the otherwise silent room. Vance watched the data points populate a graph on her main screen, a sprawling, chaotic mess of timings that seemed to confirm her skepticism. They were just noise, the tiny, expected fluctuations of a signal traveling over incomprehensible distances, nudged and jostled by gravity and interstellar dust. She was about to terminate the program and go home when a secondary window, one she had almost forgotten about, blinked with an alert. This window was not tracking the timing of individual pulses, but rather the total duration of the entire primary cycle from its opening burst to its final fading whisper. It was displaying a single, impossibly straight line, but it was not a flat line. It was angled, sloping almost imperceptibly, yet undeniably downwards. A cold dread mingled with an electric thrill she had never known prickled at the back of her neck. It couldn't be. The instruments had to be miscalibrated. The program must have a bug. The grand cycle of the 3i Atlas signal was the one constant, the one piece of bedrock they had to stand on. It was their celestial standard, repeating every 19 hours, 7 minutes, and 4.3 seconds. Except her screen was telling her it wasn't. The last cycle had been shorter. Not by much, just by a handful of nanoseconds, but the deviation was there. And the cycle before that had been infinitesimally longer than the last, and the one before that longer still. She frantically expanded the timeline, pulling in data stretching back to the very first day the signal was confirmed. There it was. A pattern not of repetition but of reduction. A perfect linear decay. The great unshakable rhythm of the alien signal was in fact slowing down. No, that wasn't right. It wasn't slowing down. The signal's cycle was getting times shorter, asterisk. The silence she had been tasked to measure was shrinking. It was a change so subtle, so minuscule, that it had been completely lost in the statistical noise, dismissed by every other analysis team on the planet as instrumental drift. But her program, designed to find the faintest heartbeats in the cosmos, had seen it. And it was not drift. It was deliberate. It was precise. It was mathematics. With trembling hands, Vance began to model the decay. She tried to fit it to known physics, to gravitational time dilation, to orbital mechanics. Nothing worked. The rate of change was too steady, too clean, too artificial. It was not a product of nature, it was the product of a mind. Then another thought struck her, a hypothesis so outlandish she almost dismissed it. What if the signal's content, the symphony they had been trying to translate, was a distraction? What if the intricate pulses and frequencies were merely the decorative casing for the real mechanism? What if the true message wasn't dumb, the sound, but the timepiece itself? She isolated the rate of decay and converted it from a measure of time into a pure, dimensionless number, a value. Then she took the value from the previous cycle and compared it, and the one before that. A sequence began to emerge from the noise, a string of digits written not in ink but in the fabric of space-time itself. It was not a language, it was not a picture, it was an abacus, a cosmic abacus with each cycle of the signal representing the removal of a single precise bead. The complex symphony was just the grand theatrical gesture of the bead being moved. All their work, all their focus on the notes, had caused them to miss the simple, terrifying fact that someone or something was counting. And the numbers were not going up, they were going down. Within an hour, The discovery tore through the secure channels that connected the global consortium. The initial response was deep, ingrained skepticism. Vance's claim was too radical. It reframed their entire multi-year effort as a colossal misinterpretation. Yet her data was flawless, her methodology unassailable. Teams in Pasadena and Jodrell Bank, initially dismissive, ran her analysis on their own independent datasets. The silence in the video conferences that followed was more profound than any they had ever measured from the stars. On screens across the world, the same impossible downward-sloping line appeared. The truth was inescapable, confirmed by every major observatory on the planet. They had all seen it, but they had not times looked asterisk. They had mistaken the ticking of the clock for the message it was meant to deliver. The signal was no longer a repeating loop, it was a finite sequence, a deliberate and measured progression. Humanity, for the first time in its existence, was looking at a clock that was not its own. The official announcement came not from a single government, but from a joint press conference held by the heads of the world's leading space agencies. The tone was not one of triumphant discovery, but of deep, resonant gravity. The words were chosen with the care of diplomats handling a nuclear crisis. There was no talk of aliens or invaders, only of an artificial signal of extraterrestrial origin and a newly understood temporal characteristic. But the subtext was earth-shattering, and it rippled through the global consciousness like a seismic shock. We were no longer simply being hailed from across the deep. We were being put on notice. The revelation landed with a peculiar bifurcated force. For the scientific community, it was a moment of supreme, terrifying vindication. The signal was intelligent. The patterns were deliberate. It was the single greatest discovery in the history of science. But for the rest of humanity, the news was received with a chilling, primal dread. The word countdown entered the global lexicon overnight, a term freighted with an existential weight it had never before carried. It dominated every news broadcast, every social media feed, every conversation around every dinner table. A clock was ticking. The great abstract mystery of the stars had suddenly become a concrete and urgent reality with a deadline. The markets convulsed in spasms of uncertainty. Faiths and philosophies, which for millennia had debated humanity's place in the cosmos, were now confronted with an answer far stranger and more alarming than any of their prophets had ever conceived. We were not alone, and our first confirmed contact was not a greeting but an appointment. The signal from 3i, Atlas, took on a new, ominous character. Its familiar, intricate pulse was no longer a source of wonder, but a source of anxiety. Each 19-hour cycle was another tick of that unseen clock, another step closer to an unknown destination. People began to mark their days by it. News channels displayed a new graphic in the corner of their screens, not tracking stocks or weather, but the progression of the signal, a slow-moving bar inching towards an invisible end. Looking up at the night sky was no longer an act of idle curiosity. It was an act of profound suspense. You could feel it in the air, a low hum of collective apprehension, the feeling of a species holding its breath. The search for meaning had been replaced by a search for time. And this brought humanity to the foot of the ultimate question, the one that now eclipsed all others. The countdown was real, the mathematics undeniable, but it was a clock without a face. We could see the second hand moving, but we did not know the units. Was each tick a day, a year, a century? Were we counting down to an event next week or in 1,000 generations? The rate of decay was so slow that it was impossible to extrapolate the starting point, the grand number from which it had all begun. We had no way of knowing how long the clock had already been ticking before we first tuned in. We had walked into a theater in the middle of a film, and all we knew for certain was that the final scene was approaching. The nature of the countdown became the new global obsession, a puzzle that consumed the brightest minds and the most fervent speculators alike. What happens when the counting stops? What is it counting down times to times? Is it an arrival, the final approach of the intelligence that built this colossal metronome? Is it an activation, the awakening of some technology dormant within? 3i, Atlas itself, a celestial machine waiting for its appointed hour? Or is it something far more unsettling, a warning, a deadline for a test we did not know we were taking? Perhaps it is a purely automated process, the final gasp of a long-dead civilization's legacy, a lighthouse whose bulb is about to flicker and die, plunging us back into a silence even more profound than before. Hope and fear now waged a war for the soul of humanity, each side armed with the same absolute lack of evidence. We were staring at the ultimate enigma, a final number we could not calculate, and an outcome we could not possibly predict. The signal was no longer a message. It was a fuse burning its way across the dark, and we all of us were gathered at the other end, waiting for the spark. The finality of it was the first shock. Not the signal itself, which had already rewritten our place in the cosmos, but the chilling realization that it was no longer a loop. It was a clock. And with every measured pulse from the heart of 3i, Atlas, humanity's quiet existential dread curdled into a global high-frequency panic. The great cosmic question, are we alone, had been answered. But the answer had brought with it a far more terrifying question, now ticking relentlessly in the ears of 7 billion people alone, until when the signal was no longer a greeting card from the stars. It was an invoice, a summons, an hourglass, with an unknown quantity of sand, and every grain falling was a number descending toward zero. In the immediate aftermath, the world did something it had never truly done before. It held its breath, and then it converged. The old architecture of science, built on peer-reviewed papers, methodical conferences, and the slow, dignified march of progress, was shattered overnight. In its place rose a frantic global real-time collaboration, a single human mindscape connected by encrypted fiber-optic lines and fueled by caffeine and fear. The Very Large Array in New Mexico, the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope in China, the subterranean neutrino detectors in Antarctica, they all became ganglia in a planetary nervous system, all twitching in response to the same alien stimulus. We created the Atlas Decryption Initiative, the ADI, a consortium of the world's brightest minds in mathematics, linguistics, astrophysics, and computer science, headquartered in a hastily repurposed data bunker beneath Geneva. Their task was monumental, almost absurd in its scope, to interpret the mind of God, or something very much like it, on a deadline. You could feel the pressure in the silence of their assembly halls, a weight so immense it seemed to bend the very air. On a central screen, visible from every workstation, was the number. The current integer in the countdown, updated with every new transmission from the approaching interloper. It hung there not just as data, but as an accusation, a reminder of their inadequacy. It was a constant throbbing pulse of failure, a digital heartbeat for a species on borrowed time. Every conversation, every equation scribbled on a whiteboard, every line of code compiled was performed under the shadow of that descending figure. The effort began with a frantic search for a key, a cosmic Rosetta Stone buried somewhere in the signal's complex architecture. The countdown itself was the most obvious feature, but the scientists of the ADI believed it couldn't be the entire message. That would be like sending a letter containing only a single, endlessly repeated word. Surely the intelligence behind 3i Atlas was more sophisticated. They tore the signal apart photon by photon. They analyzed the polarization of its electromagnetic waves, hoping for a hidden layer of information, perhaps a three-dimensional model encoded in the twisting light. They ran quantum algorithms against the background noise, the faint hiss between the primary pulses, searching for a ghost in the machine, a watermark of compressed data left behind by the sender. One team, led by a brilliant but disgraced cryptographer from GCHQ named Alistair Finch, pursued the theory that the key was mathematical. His group, nicknamed the Platonists, operated on the assumption that mathematics is the one truly universal language. They believed the countdown was a primer. It wasn't just counting down, it was teaching us how times to count, establishing a base system. Their hypothesis was that woven into the fabric of the signal, in the precise timing between the pulses, or the subtle frequency shifts, were the great universal constants. They hunted for pi, for the golden ratio, for Euler's number, for the fine structure constant. They were searching for a familiar sequence, a mathematical hello, that would unlock the syntax of the greater message. For 72 feverish hours, they thought they had it. A young postdoctoral student from Mumbai, working on her third consecutive all-nighter, found a recurring fluctuation in the signal's amplitude. When plotted on a logarithmic scale, the pattern was an almost perfect representation of the Fibonacci sequence. The news leaked from the Geneva bunker, and for a few hours the world felt a surge of euphoric hope. We were having a conversation. We were beginning to understand. Stock markets rallied. Global leaders prepared triumphant speeches. We had found the first word in the alien dictionary. The celebration, however, was tragically premature. A rival team at MIT, running a more rigorous error correction analysis, discovered the pattern was a statistical illusion, an artifact created by the gravitational lensing of a rogue dwarf galaxy drifting between Earth and 3I, Atlas. It was a cosmic mirage. The signal was not whispering the secrets of the universe. Our own galaxy was simply getting in the way. The hope evaporated as quickly as it had formed, leaving behind an even deeper, more bitter anxiety. While the mathematicians looked for abstract keys, another faction, dominated by astrophysicists and celestial mechanics experts, took a more literal approach. They were the cartographers. To them, the countdown wasn't a number in a sequence, but a coordinate. Or rather, a series of coordinates. Their central thesis was that the signal was a map, a pointer. But to where or to when, they cross-referenced the descending numbers with every astronomical catalogue in existence. They treated the sequence as a vector in three-dimensional space, hoping it would point to a specific star system, a galactic anomaly, a point of origin. They treated it as a temporal marker, trying to align the countdown with the known cycles of pulsars, the orbits of exoplanets, or the predicted timelines of supernovae. Their great tantalizing lead came from a team working with data from the Gaia Space Observatory. They discovered that if you treated the countdown sequence not as a single number but as a set of three variables, representing declination, right ascension, and redshift, it painted a path, an impossibly precise trajectory leading away from the constellation Cygnus and terminating in a region of space we had always considered utterly empty. A vast, dark void between galactic filaments, a place known to astronomers as the Botez Void, the Great Nothing. Was this the destination, the origin, a warning to stay away? Or was it an invitation to look closer, to aim our instruments at a patch of sky we had always dismissed as barren? The theory was elegant, compelling, and utterly terrifying. An intelligence that could navigate, or perhaps even originate, from the absolute emptiness between galaxies was a concept so far beyond our understanding of biology or technology that it bordered on the theological. Yet even as these grand unified efforts were underway, the old familiar cracks in human unity began to show. The ADI was a noble idea, but it existed in a world still carved up by borders, by ideologies, and by deep-seated mistrust. While the world's scientific community tried to present a united front, its governments were playing a different game. In the silent, shielded rooms of the Pentagon, a DARPA black project known as Echelon Prime was running its own parallel decryption effort, siphoning data from the ADI while sharing nothing in return. They weren't just trying to understand the signal, they were trying to weaponize that understanding. Their focus was on defensive and offensive applications. Could the signal be jammed? Could it be redirected? Could its energy be harnessed? To them, 3 Atlas was not a potential messenger. It was an incoming threat, and the first nation to decipher its intent would hold the ultimate strategic advantage. In Moscow and Beijing, similar clandestine programs were spun up. The race to understand the countdown became the newest and most dangerous front in the Cold War. It was an auction for the future of humanity, and the bidding was happening in secret. This created a toxic, paranoid atmosphere within the open science community. Researchers at the ADI began to look at their colleagues with suspicion. Was the friendly astrophysicist from the Chinese Academy of Sciences feeding data back to the MSS? Was the American software engineer a plant for the NSA? The great global collaboration was poisoned by the fear that any breakthrough would be instantly co-opted by national interests used not for the salvation of the species but for the dominance of one faction over another. The countdown wasn't just ticking for humanity as a whole, it was ticking for the very idea of a unified humanity. And below it all, on the surface, the public teetered on a knife's edge between global vigil and mass hysteria. The countdown became the new rhythm of life. It was displayed on news channels, on websites, on screens in public squares. New religions sprang up overnight. The children of the countdown saw 3i Atlas as a messianic entity, its arrival a moment of rapture. Doomsday cults like the Final Silence preached that the countdown was a divine judgment, and they gathered in remote compounds to await the cleansing fire. Markets swung wildly on the faintest rumor of a breakthrough or a setback. There were riots in some cities sparked by fears of food shortages or government conspiracies. In others, millions gathered in parks and stadiums, holding candles and singing, staring up at the patch of sky where the silent traveler was approaching a collective prayer offered up to an unknown god. This public pressure fed back into the scientific effort, creating a vicious cycle of expectation and desperation. This led to the most dangerous phase of the decryption attempt, the rise of the radical theorists. Frustrated by the lack of progress from the mathematicians and the astrophysicists, a third camp emerged. This group, composed of xenolinguists, philosophers, and cognitive scientists, argued that everyone was missing the point. They claimed we were trying to read a letter by analyzing the chemical composition of the ink. The conceptualists, as they were known, proposed that the message was not times in times the countdown times was times the message. Their theories were dizzying, terrifying, and impossible to prove. One school of thought suggested it was a test, a filter. The intelligence behind 3i Atlas had sent a challenge into the void, and only a species capable of uniting to solve it in time would be deemed worthy of contact. Our squabbling, our secrecy, our geopolitical games, these were all part of our answer. We were being graded on our ability to cooperate, and we were failing spectacularly. The countdown wasn't the time until their arrival. It was the time we had left to save ourselves from our own nature. An even darker theory, championed by a controversial philosopher at Oxford named Dr. Aris Thorne, was the self-destruct hypothesis. Thorne argued that the countdown was not aimed at us at all, it was an internal mechanism. He proposed that 3i Atlas was a berserker probe of unimaginable age, a relic from some ancient forgotten war programmed to sterilize any star system it encountered that showed signs of intelligent life. But its power source was failing, its mission directives degrading. The countdown, he argued, was the timer on its own self-destruct sequence, a final desperate act of a dying machine to prevent itself from completing its monstrous task. In this scenario, zero was not our doom, but our salvation. The best thing we could do was nothing. To simply wait and pray, the machine died before it reached us. The ethical dilemma this created was profound. If Thorne was right, any attempt to communicate with 3i Atlas to send a signal back could be interpreted by its ancient programming as the very signature of intelligence it was designed to eradicate. Our attempt to say hello might be the very thing that signed our death warrant. The debate raged in the halls of the ADI and the United Nations. Do we reach out? Do we try to answer what we believe is a call? Or do we hide, powering down our transmitters, muffling our planetary radio signature, and pretending we aren't here, hoping the threat passes us by? It was the ultimate paradox. To save ourselves, we might have to abandon the very curiosity that made us human. We would have to extinguish our own light and sit silently in the dark. This fierce debate, this paralysis of action consumed weeks while the number on the screen kept shrinking, weeks while the object itself grew infinitesimally brighter in our most powerful telescopes. It was no longer a faint smudge of data. It was becoming a physical reality, a celestial bullet with our name on it. The pressure was reaching a breaking point. The world was demanding an answer, any answer, but the people tasked with finding it were more divided than ever, lost in a wilderness of theories, each more terrifying than the last. Was it a key, a map, a test, a tombstone? Every hypothesis was a doorway, and behind every door was a future that twisted the destiny of our species in a new and profound direction. And then one quiet Tuesday morning, everything changed again. The countdown continued its rhythm as implacably steady as before. But it was no longer alone. From the heart of the signal, a new element emerged. It was not a pulse, not a number, but a sustained complex wave, a carrier signal of breathtaking intricacy woven underneath the stark beat of the countdown. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like hearing a whisper beneath a drum. It had not been there moments before. Its sudden appearance rendered half of the prevailing theories obsolete in an instant. This was no simple clockwork mechanism. It was not a dying machine. It was an active intelligence. The signal was no longer just counting down. It was now broadcasting something else entirely, something new. The Platonists, the cartographers, the conceptualists, they all fell silent, their models and predictions turned to dust. The arrival of this new layer of information was not a relief. It was a terrifying escalation. It felt like a response. It felt as if, after all our frantic listening, the entity behind 3I, Atlas, had finally leaned in closer to the microphone. It had cleared its throat. The prelude was over and the true message was about to begin. And we were no closer to understanding the language than we had been on day one. We had merely run out of time to learn, and so in the final hours the world fell silent. Not with the quiet of peace, but with the deafening collective hush of 7 billion souls holding their breath. Every television network, every radio station, every streaming platform had ceased, its regular broadcast replaced by the simple, stark, numerical heartbeat of 3I Atlas. It was a pulse, now felt in the bones, a rhythmic planetary arrhythmia, counting down the seconds to an unknown fate. From the mission control centers at JPL and the European Space Operations Center, a state of controlled chaos had morphed into a kind of sacred vigil. The world's finest minds, once racing against the clock with frantic energy, now stood transfixed before their screens, their work largely done. They had tracked, they had modeled, they had predicted. Now all they could do was watch. All they could do was listen. The numbers continued their relentless descent, each digit a hammer blow against the fragile shield of human certainty. 3 hours. We had followed this crystalline messenger across the gulf of interstellar space, a journey that had dwarfed all of our own species' history. It had moved with a purpose that mocked the random wanderings of comets and asteroids. Its trajectory a line of impossible precision aimed not at our world, but at a specific empty point in space. Lagrange Point 2, the place where Earth and Sun's gravity find a delicate, perfect balance. It was a cosmic keyhole, and 3I, Atlas was the key, machined in a forge beyond our imagination and set to turn at a time of its own choosing. Its surface, once a uniform, non-reflective black, had begun to change. Subtle geometric patterns, infinitesimally fine, were now glowing with a soft internal luminescence, shifting and reconfiguring in sync with the descending numbers. It was no longer just broadcasting a signal. The object itself was becoming the message, a vast three-dimensional ticker tape displaying a language we couldn't read. The deciphering teams scattered in bunkers and laboratories across the globe worked on. They were no longer trying to stop anything but simply to understand, to have one single answer before the clock struck zero. For months, they had thrown every cryptographic tool we possessed at the signal's underlying structure. They had treated it as a code, a cipher, meant to be broken by cleverness and computational brute force. They found staggering complexity layers of mathematical elegance that hinted at a sentience far beyond our own, yet the core meaning remained stubbornly locked away. It was a perfect prison of information, and we were rattling its bars, deaf to the whispers from within. The signal was clean, impossibly so, a pure carrier wave with the countdown sequence embedded using a modulation scheme that was itself a lesson in advanced physics. But beneath that simple count, buried in the phase shifts and fractal modulations, was a second layer of data, a torrent of information so dense it was like trying to transcribe the contents of a waterfall. This was the true prize. This was the message everyone on Earth was desperate to read. As the countdown breached the 2-hour mark, a palpable sense of despair had begun to settle into the analysis rooms. The data stream remained gibberish, elegant, structured, beautiful gibberish. It was a symphony of chaos, a masterpiece of mathematical noise. Was this the ultimate cosmic joke? A calling card from a civilization so advanced that their casual transmissions were to us indistinguishable from the background radiation of the universe? Had we been staring at a library for months, only to realize we lacked the concept of an alphabet doctor? Aris Thorne, leading the Unified Signal Analysis team from the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile, stood back from his primary console. The air was thin at this altitude, and in the exhausted stillness of the control room, every breath felt deliberate. He looked past the frantic scrawls on the glass boards, past the exhausted faces of his colleagues, and out at the monitor displaying the raw data waterfall. We had been looking at it all wrong. We were searching for language, for symbols, for the kind of discrete packets of meaning that defined our own communication. We were searching for our own reflection in the signal, and it wasn't there. The human mind is a master of pattern recognition, but it is also a prisoner of its own biases. We seek linear progressions, simple cause and effect, 1, then 2, then 3. This assumption had been their foundation, and it was now their cage. It was a junior analyst, a graduate student from Mumbai, named Priya Sharma, who first saw the ghost in the machine. She wasn't looking at the primary data. She was running a tertiary diagnostic on the tiny, almost immeasurable fluctuations in the signal's frequency, the subtle Doppler shifts caused by the object's microscopic course corrections. These shifts were supposed to be random, the result of the machine's engines making near imperceptible adjustments. But they weren't random. And more importantly, they weren't linear. She charted them, and the curve that appeared on her screen was not a straight line but a graceful sweeping arc, a logarithm. A wave of electricity shot through the room as Thorne's team swarmed her station. The thought was so counterintuitive yet so profoundly simple. What if the key to unlocking the data wasn't hidden in the data itself, but in the rate at which the data was changing? What if the countdown itself was the cipher key, but not as a sequence of integers? What if its value was logarithmic, tied to the fundamental constants of the universe? They began, working their fingers, flying across keyboards with a renewed, desperate fire. They recalibrated their decryption algorithms, instructing them to stop looking for linguistic patterns and instead look for correlations based on the logarithmic decay of the countdown benchmarked against the fine structure, constant, and the Planck length. They were no longer trying to pick a lock. They were tuning a universal resonant frequency. For a harrowing 47 minutes, nothing happened. The data stream remained a chaotic cascade of meaningless symbols. The global countdown clock ticked past 60 minutes. The world waited oblivious to the frantic breakthrough happening in the high desert of Chile. Then it happened. A single block of data on one of the central monitors flickered from red to green. Then another, and another. A collective gasp filled the control room. It was like watching a photograph develop in a darkroom, ghostly shapes slowly emerging from a silver nitrate fog. The gibberish was resolving. But it wasn't resolving into words or pictures in any conventional sense. It was resolving into pure mathematics. Not equations to be solved, but geometric proofs, axioms, foundational principles of physics that we had never conceived of. It was a schematic, but not for a machine of metal and circuits. This was a blueprint for space-time itself. The data described how to fold dimensions, how to manipulate gravity as if it were clay, how to source energy from the quantum vacuum of empty space. It was the complete, unabridged instruction manual for the universe. It was the source code. News of the breakthrough spread through the secure networks like wildfire. JPL, Baikonur, Beijing, all at once, their own systems retuned with the logarithmic key from Chile, began to see the same thing. A planetary collaboration, once strained by politics and suspicion, now became a single unified consciousness working together to assemble this cosmic Rosetta Stone. With less than 15 minutes remaining, the scope of the message became terrifyingly clear. This was not a history lesson or a philosophical treatise. It was a technology transfer of unimaginable power. The final sections of the data began to resolve, and what they showed stopped every heart. It was a biological sequence, a genetic code, but one built on a silicon framework, not carbon. It was a diagram of a consciousness that could exist independent of a biological vessel, a pattern of pure information capable of self-organization. And next to it, the final chilling piece of the puzzle, a star chart. But the constellations were wrong. They were not the stars as seen from Earth or from anywhere in our galaxy. It was a map of the local galactic cluster, with a single trajectory line drawn from a dying galaxy, Andromeda, straight to ours, a path of exodus. The last 10 minutes felt like an eternity and an instant. On the screens, the shimmering geometric patterns covering 3I, Atlas, intensified the light, pulsing faster and faster, a celestial firefly preparing for its final brilliant flash. Humanity had become a spectator at its own Genesis event. Were these instructions a gift, a lifeline thrown across the void from a civilization that had transcended its own physical limits? Or was it a Trojan horse, a seed designed to replicate, to overwrite, to replace? There was no time to debate, no time for fear. There was only the countdown. 1 minute. The low, rhythmic pulse broadcast to the world began to climb, in pitch becoming a single piercing tone. In living rooms and city squares, people held each other, strangers, embracing strangers, their faces illuminated by the glow of screens, all showing the same inexorable numbers. 30 seconds. The data stream from 3I Atlas stopped. The download was complete. The object had delivered its payload of information. Now it was simply waiting. 10, 9, 8. You could feel the planet tense, a single organism bracing for impact. The light from the object at L2 was now so bright it was visible to the naked eye, a new temporary star in our sky, a diamond on black velvet. 7, 6, 5. In the Atacama control room, Dr. Thorne and Priya Sharma stood side by side, not looking at their screens anymore, but at each other, sharing a look of profound, terrifying, and beautiful understanding. They had been the first to read the letter. Now they would witness its opening. 4, 3, 2. The piercing tone ceased. For one beautiful, perfect second, the world returned to an absolute, unearthly silence. The silence of the beginning, the silence before the word. 1. The countdown reached 0. There was no explosion, no blinding flash of destructive energy. There was only light. From the position of 3I, Atlas, a single coherent beam of pure white light erupted, but it did not travel outwards. It contracted inwards. The object, this magnificent interstellar vessel that had crossed millions of years of darkness, folded in on itself, collapsing into an infinitesimally small point, and from that point the message bloomed. It wasn't broadcast on radio waves or microwaves. It was transmitted directly into the fabric of space-time itself. A gravitational wave of staggering complexity and power, not a violent ripple from a collapsing star, but a structured, intentional, resonant hum. It washed over the Earth in an instant, passing through our planet, through our bodies, through every atom of our being as if we were ghosts. It was a signal that needed no receiver, for the universe itself was the medium. And on every screen, in every laboratory that had downloaded the data, the final blueprint snapped into place. It was no longer just a schematic. It was alive. A self-executing code that began to run not on our computers, but within the quantum structure of the data itself. A ghost in the machine had been born. We had been given the fire of the gods, a complete understanding of creation itself. The message wasn't a warning, nor was it a simple greeting. It was an inheritance. A final desperate gift from a civilization that, facing its own end, had chosen not to build an ark of flesh and blood, but to cast its soul into the void, a seed of knowledge waiting for fertile ground. The countdown was over, but humanity's childhood had just ended. And a new, uncertain, and infinitely more complex era had just begun. We now stood on a precipice, staring into a future illuminated by a strange new light, holding in our hands the very tools of Genesis. The question, the only question that now mattered, was what would we, the chaotic, brilliant, and violent children of Earth, choose to create? And so, after a journey of 1,000 years, the countdown reached its conclusion. Not with a cataclysm, not with a roar of cosmic fire, but with a transmission of impossible density, and then a profound, echoing silence. The clock, our celestial metronome for so long, had simply stopped. The signal, that heartbeat from the void that had mesmerized a planet, was gone. In its place, it left behind a void more terrifying and more promising than we could have ever conceived. We stood in the quiet aftermath, a species holding its breath collectively, realizing that the universe had just spoken its first and perhaps last word to us. The silence was not an ending, it was a birth. It was the deafening sound of a new reality, dawning a reality in which we were no longer the solitary dreamers of the cosmos, but the recipients of an inheritance we had not known we were due. That final, incomprehensible burst of data, the payload at the end of the long count, was not a message in the way we understood it. It was a key, a blueprint. A complete, unredacted library of a civilization far beyond our own, delivered to our doorstep by a ghost ship that had fulfilled its final purpose. Humanity, for one brief, shining moment, was united not in fear but in absolute, paralyzing awe. The political squabbles, the economic rivalries, the ancient hatreds that had defined our history, they all seemed like the petty arguments of children in the shadow of this revelation. On every continent, people looked up no longer at a faint moving star, but at the ghost of a messenger, the point in space where our innocence had been shed. The data cascaded through our networks, a torrent of pure information that our greatest supercomputers could barely contain, let alone comprehend. Initial translations were frantic, chaotic. We saw mathematics that defied our axioms, physics that treated space-time not as a stage but as a sculptable medium. We saw biology based on silicon polymer chains, thriving in environments we had deemed sterile. We saw art rendered in dimensions we could not perceive, music composed from the resonance of dying stars. It was like a single Stone Age tribe being handed the entire collected knowledge of the 21st century. We were overwhelmed, humbled, and irrevocably changed. The gift was so immense, so transformative, that it was also a burden. A responsibility of cosmic proportions had been placed upon our young shoulders. The first decade after what we now call the arrival was a blur of frantic discovery, a golden age of science unparalleled in human history. Physics was not revised, it was reborn. The Standard Model, once our proudest achievement, became a footnote, a special case in a far grander, more elegant universal theory. The data from 3I, Atlas, contained what our physicists called the source code, a unified theory that seamlessly wove together gravity and the quantum world. It described not four fundamental forces, but one, manifesting in different ways across a multidimensional substrate we had never even theorized. Suddenly, concepts like wormholes and warp drives, long the domain of science fiction, were laid bare on our theoretical workbenches. The equations were there. They were real. We learned that gravity was not merely the passive curvature of space-time, but a force that could be actively modulated, amplified, and even negated. The messenger itself, 3I, Atlas, had not coasted through the void. It had actively fallen toward our sun, using gravitational currents in the fabric of space as a galactic river, a journey that was less a feat of propulsion and more one of cosmic navigation. Mastering this would take centuries, but the path was now illuminated. We were no longer islanders staring at the horizon. We had been given a map of the ocean and the principles of shipbuilding. Biology underwent an even more profound ontological shock. The data packet contained the complete genomic and proteomic sequences for thousands of life forms, a veritable encyclopedia of extraterrestrial existence. It confirmed what we had long suspected, but could never prove that life was not a fluke, not a fragile chemical accident unique to our world, but a fundamental and incredibly diverse expression of cosmic law. We saw creatures that metabolized methane on tidally locked worlds, crystalline entities that lived for millennia in the vacuum of space, and even hints of a collective consciousness formed by vast fungal networks on a planet orbiting a Seville neutron star. This was not just a catalogue, it was a lesson. It showed us that life could be radically different, yet it was all underpinned by the same deep principles of information replication and evolution. Our own DNA, our precious code of life, was revealed to be just one dialect in a universal language. This revelation shattered the last vestiges of our biological chauvinism. In the face of this staggering biodiversity, the concept of human supremacy became a laughable absurdity. We were one branch, a beautiful and complex one, on an infinite cosmic tree whose roots ran deeper than we could possibly imagine. Medical science was revolutionized overnight. The alien biology provided insights into cellular regeneration, information storage in complex molecules, and energy transfer systems that made our own mitochondria seem primitive. Cures for diseases that had plagued us for centuries were found not through painstaking trial and error, but by analogy, by studying the elegant solutions another form of life had already perfected. But the transformation was not confined to our laboratories. It echoed in our art, our philosophy, and our religions. A new school of music emerged, cosmicism, using the alien mathematical principles to create symphonies of breathtaking complexity and emotional depth. Architects began designing structures inspired by the non-Euclidean geometries found in the data buildings that seemed to twist and fold in on themselves, challenging our very perception of space. Our religions, the ancient frameworks we had used to find meaning, were forced into a painful but necessary evolution. Some splintered, unable to reconcile their geocentric doctrines with the reality of a populated universe. Others blossomed, finding in the arrival a confirmation of a divine plan far grander and more mysterious than they had ever preached. The idea of a creator was no longer confined to one world, but expanded to encompass a cosmos teeming with endless forms most beautiful. A new global holiday was declared Arrival Day, marking the moment the countdown ended. It is a day of quiet contemplation, a day we turn off our city lights, look to the stars, and remember that we are part of something immeasurably vast. We are the children of Earth, but we are also the students of the stars. Yet amidst this renaissance of knowledge and culture, new and unsettling questions began to haunt us. The silence left by 3I Atlas was not empty. It was heavy, with unspoken implications. The data packet was a perfect library, but it was also sterile. It contained no history of the senders, no art depicting their form, no stories of their triumphs or sorrows. There was no I or we in the entire transmission. It was a purely objective, dispassionate gift of knowledge, like a textbook left on a doorstep. Who were they? Why did they choose us? And most chillingly, where are they now? The perfection of the data suggests a civilization that had transcended the messy struggles of evolution, a species that had reached the logical endpoint of scientific understanding. Perhaps they had converted themselves into pure energy, or uploaded their consciousness into some computational substrate, leaving behind this monument of knowledge as their final act. Or perhaps, in a darker interpretation, the library was a warning. Perhaps it contained all the knowledge needed to survive in a dangerous universe, a starter kit for a fledgling race sent by a civilization that had itself failed to survive. The countdown in this light was not a timer for arrival, but a deadline, a test. Were we capable of coming together as a species to receive this gift? Were we mature enough not to weaponize it, not to tear ourselves apart over its secrets? The fact that we are still here suggests we may have passed. The probe itself, 3I Atlas, became the most sacred archaeological site in human history. After its final transmission, its internal power source died, as if its only purpose had been the countdown and delivery. It now tumbles silently in a distant, stable orbit, a 3-kilometer-long shard of alien crystal and metal. We have sent probes to study it, to touch its impossibly smooth hull, but we have not dared to break it open. It is a tomb, a monument, and a holy relic all at once. We study its gravitational wake, the faint ripples in space-time it left as it navigated our system, and from these echoes we are learning the practical art of sailing the cosmic seas. Every university, every government, every major corporation is now engaged in a single overarching enterprise, the effort to understand and apply the Atlas inheritance. We are building new kinds of telescopes, not to look for planets, but to look for the specific energy signatures and gravitational disturbances the alien physics predicts. We are no longer just listening for simple radio broadcasts. We are searching for the hum of civilizations shaping the very fabric of their local space. Our own solar system has become a laboratory. We are exploring the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, not just with robotic rovers, but with a new sense of purpose, searching for the microbial life we now know must be there, comparing its terrestrial dialect to the grander language of the Atlas. Encyclopedia. The dream of interstellar travel is no longer a dream. It is an engineering problem. The data provided the theoretical framework for FTL for gravity channeling, but the practical application requires materials we have not yet invented and energy sources we can barely control. It may take us 500 years, or it may take 1,000, but for the first time in our history, the journey to another star is a tangible goal on our civilizational horizon. We are no longer just explorers. We are heirs, tasked with taking the legacy of a silent benefactor and using it to finally step off our cradle world. We must become a species worthy of the knowledge we have been given. So where do we go from here? The journey of 3I Atlas has ended, but our own has just begun. The universe did not shrink with the revelation of other life. It expanded into an infinity of new possibilities and profound new mysteries. We are armed with the knowledge of the gods, but we still possess the hearts of men, with all our flaws, our fears, and our capacity for both wondrous creation and senseless destruction. The Atlas inheritance is not a guarantee of our survival. It is an opportunity, the single greatest opportunity in the history of our species. The silence from the stars is no longer the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of anticipation. It is the quiet of a vast, ancient cosmos waiting to see what we will do next. We have been given the fire. We can use it to warm our home and light our way to the stars, or we can use it to burn our world to ash. The choice, as it has always been, is ours. The signal has stopped, the clock has run down, but the real countdown, the one that measures the future of humanity itself, has only just begun. We look up at the same stars our ancestors did, but we see a different sky. We see a challenge. We see a promise. And we see a home not just on this pale blue dot, but out there in the silent, waiting dark.